welcome to another episode of the Picky Bastards podcast. I'm Nirmal Trivedi, lead bastard for today's show, alongside Nick Parker and Fran Slater, both of whom are more picky than I am today, probably, as usual.
I'll argue with that, yeah.
Today, we've gathered today to discuss 4 new albums, 1 classic album, and 1 artist. And I introduce the other 2 to a new artist or one that they're less than familiar with. So this episode's new albums are Marika Hackman's I'm Not Your Man, James McAlister's Planetarium, Algiers, The Underside of Power, and Pallbearer's Heartless. We'll also look at the classic album Chlor by Chlor, which originally came out in 2005 and was placed first in a list of greatest albums you've never heard by the NME in 2010. So looking forward to that.
Wow, you sound like a professional right now. I can't allow this to continue. This is just sounding too good, really.
You've just taken 2 of my bullet points as well.
I really hope that you cut yourself out of that part because, you know, that really interrupts my flow here.
Well, don't be so.
That's what I'm here for.
Good. All right, we'll end with me introducing the great Leonard Cohen to my fellow bastards. So without further ado, let's get on with it. So Fran, which of our new albums made you smile more than once? And if it's made you smile just once, please don't refer to it.
Well, even though this may be the most random question I've been asked yet in Picky Bastards history, it would definitely be Marika Hackman, I'm Not Your Man. And although Nick said to me earlier, he assumed that I would choose something that made me smile because I hated it. No, I'm choosing it because it did generally make me smile. It was, I don't know how familiar you guys are with Marika. She's had 1 album before, and it was kind of a really dreamy folk pop album, which I liked. But this one kind of had a lot more energy and bite to it, and it was a really refreshingly honest and open album, and some of the lyrics really made me smile. I found quite amusing at times and quite a very honest album, like I said, but one of the lyrics I loved was in a song called Cigarette, where she says, "When did it get so forced, drunk by the second course, you're never gonna let me win." It's a beautiful lyric, but I just think in general it was a really powerful album, and I think the song Boyfriend, which kicks off the album, kind of is a calling card for the album because it's about her sexuality and her coming out and how, despite being gay, she still sort of exerts a lot of power over men, which I found a really fascinating sort of concept. And also, I don't know if you guys know that Big Moon, who was shortlisted for the Mercury Award, were the backing band on the whole album.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Which,
wow.
And I felt her with that band behind her is such a massive step forward from the last album, which when I think a lot of time when people change styles so drastically, it's a failure, but for this it was a big step up. So it made me smile because I really enjoyed the album and got a lot out of it, but also lyrically it was a pretty funny album, and I enjoyed it a lot.
So,
wow.
So were you saying, Fran, that it struck you as quite different from the first one, huh?
It's very different from the first one. I mean, weirdly, probably my favourite song on this new one is the song Cigarette. And that's probably the closest to her old album, even though I prefer this album. It was all very slow, ballady songs with some quite bizarre lyrics, which she's carried on. But it was a much calmer, quieter album. None of the because there's some really sort of lively tracks on this album, which was just not part of her thing before. And she was very pigeonholed. Actually, everyone was like, "Oh, here's this other folky, poppy, whiny singer type thing," and now with this album she's kind of blown that out of the water, I think. Right.
Yeah, Nick, what do you think?
Oh, wow, first of all, you're both up in your game with the professionalism. You sound like you actually have thought this through. You have ideas.
Maybe it's the break we've had.
The whole thing is just putting me off, really. I mean, to be honest, I thought this album was all right, and I wasn't familiar with the work before, but
I introduced you to this album just like her first album about a month ago.
Which was about a month ago when we started this playlist, you mean?
Yeah. Well, no, maybe 6 months ago.
A little while ago, then, yeah.
Say the other day, and they mean 2
I
years
think
ago.
I remember listening to the first one actually once, yeah, and now you say that, I'd actually not made the connection, so I apologise for that. But
Thank you.
was... so it was a bit of a mixed bag for me. There were times in the album when the production was good, and I thought it sounded very clean and clear, what was sort of executed in the tracks. But there were some songs that sounded really irritatingly kind of jangly is all I can describe it. And I have to say, the opening song, Boyfriend, I think that was the opening song, wasn't it? Was one of those tracks. It just came across as... Sorry?
You're just wrong about that.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that very thought-out response.
Carry on.
So Boyfriend was kind of... well, for one thing, it sounded like another band that I actually prefer, who sound a bit more energetic version of it, which is Speedy Ortiz, if you know Speedy Ortiz. Anyway, a very kind of energetic and jangly, high-pitched guitar laid over... better lyrics than I thought the song was worth in a way. So in that sense, it was kind of a little bit of a mix. As I say, the whole thing was a mixed bag, and that song was a mixed bag. But I found that song quite irritating and quite an unfortunate start. Because later on in the album, there were some really nice pieces that I think worked a lot better than that. Particularly Gina's World, which was kind of a very kind of dreamy, sort of Twin Peaksy kind of. If that makes any sense. Sort of vibe.
Weirdly, I think you've almost just described how people would have described her previous album.
Okay.
Like the Twin Peak thing to it. Because she did some of the lyrics to the last song are sort of about watching people's heads fall off and stuff like that. But it's a really delicate folky pop song. So kind of hit the nail of that last album on the head. So you're just about...
Okay, so maybe I'm ready maybe I'm ready to listen to the first one again and not this one again. I mean, I didn't hate it, as I say, but it was really marred it that it started so
jangly. Yeah, I think there's something to that. I think for me as well. I will say, like, in general, this I asked that question, which album made you smile more than once, because this one, every lyrical kind of twist in it made me smile a lot. I thought lyrically it was just really beautiful and dark and gross and grotesque and odd. I think there was this one lyric about a brain marble shaped head kind of rolling, I don't know if you remember that, but it was beautiful. I thought, in kind of dark way, you get a little into my psyche there. But it was scary. Yeah, my lover Cindy, and I like what Fran was saying about how sexuality and I don't know, I didn't really look into this was a meditation on coming out, or if it was just exploration of sexuality just in general. But it was intense, and lyrically and thematically that way. So I thought it was beautiful and resonant. Lots of swearing as well, and that was interesting.
Yeah, a long line of songs with explicit next to them on the playlist. Right. I can see. Yeah, so no, I agree. Yeah.
So she just had this like middle finger kind of thing. My favorite song of this entire album was, I think, "Time's Been Reckless."
Yeah, I've got that on my list as it's like one of my favorites.
Yeah. It was a good song, just a great song, and the theme that kind of kept with me too. Obviously feeling that way as well, hitting 40 pretty soon, and. Feeling that time.
Discuss that, please.
I mean, she's kind of probably got less right to feel like that. It seems she's but, I think she's singing about someone else when she's saying "Time's been reckless with your body," not herself. So I think. But I like what you said then, Emil, about it kind of being a middle finger, because I do think the whole album, in a way, feels like a middle finger to me towards like the way she was pigeonholed and that kind of thing. So
I don't know. The first 20, let's say the first 40 seconds of every song, I was really into. Music, and then then something happened with the melodies generally, and then I thought, I'm loving the lyrics. I don't know if I'm loving this melody or I'm loving the composition, but the lyrics really kept me going all throughout this album. So I don't know, kept it up. But there is something about the jangliness of it that sort of was definitely a little there.
I got the best word of the day. You may have all this professionalism, but I got the best word of the day with jangly. That's how we win.
I just enjoy jangliness more than you two, because I've got nothing against a bit of jangliness.
No, it was, and again, I just thought it was a little bit too derivative as well of other things. Like a very poor late Pavement song, maybe. And I know Speedy Ortiz are very obsessed with Pavement as well. So. But anyway, but I think you're right. There's a massive disparity. Yeah, you should. Yeah, there's a definite big disparity between the lyrical content and the musical content, and sometimes they didn't mesh brilliantly for me. That's overall what I would say.
Well, let's move on to the next question. So, Nick, did you have any of these albums? Was it particularly striking for you in terms of production, besides the Marika Hackman?
So I'm a little bit conflicted, or at least it's not an easy comment to make for me. But I think actually Algiers is the one I would go for, and that's not because it was the most polished production, which it certainly wasn't. Even of this set, let alone of the year, of the albums I've heard this year. But it was a very interesting mix of old style production, which sounded very kind of 60s, Motown-y, with some, that kind of gospel kind of grind in it. And then also industrial beats and stuff. So I thought it was actually a really interesting mix. And the album as a whole, I found it to be really hard to get used to, hard to get into. Took me probably 6 or 7 listens before I got past this initial sense that it was just a weird jarring and sort of slamming together of things that didn't really fit. But after a while, I did get past that, and I really started to feel like it was fresh, energetic and fresh in a sense of something that I hadn't seen. I hadn't seen before, where the gospel, the Motown, the industrial, the guitar rock roots were all kind of pushed into one sort of space together, and that was exciting actually. And also I think politically it was very exciting. It was one of the stronger albums of this set, I think, of 6. So I really enjoyed it. Yeah, particularly Death March, I think, is a quite early one from that selection. And that was a very political tone, which I thought worked really well. And I'm trying to think what the other one was called now. The Underside of Power is the one which has the best kind of Motown-y, obviously the title track has the most kind of Motown-y feel to it, particularly in the outro section. And I thought that was really a bold move and something that gelled better. When I heard the first album of this band, I had a really tough time again, but never really got past that. So either I need to go back to that album and listen again and see if it improves, or maybe I just need to accept that they've improved. Maybe it's just a question of their sort of styles gelling better this time around. So I don't know what others think though.
Oh, that's interesting. So, do you know them, Fran? Have you heard the previous?
No, I didn't know them before, and I've got kind of. I was pleasantly surprised by this album, actually. I'd never heard of them, and when I went onto Spotify, when I was putting the playlist together, I saw some of the bands they were, they have related artists on Spotify. Yep. I saw some of them, and I thought Nick had just chosen another angry but pretty average band that I wasn't really going to get much out of, but turns out
I've never actually done before, so I'm a little confused about how you can say that.
There's a lot more to this than those by, like, the Slaves album, for example, that you chose and you subjected me to, and... Even Idols, I got some fun out of Idols, but this was a...
I will just point out the whole point of this place is that it's blind, and I don't know what they sound like when I select them. So I got Idols was fun, but this album I think was... And I think, like you said, it's a variety of genres. It's a good mix. And actually, what really struck me with this album is when I was sitting and listening to it, I didn't have anything to compare it to. Usually when I sit down and listen to an album, my first step is to find what it's like that I listen to, or that I don't listen to, or that I don't like,
right? And
to compare it. And with this, I didn't have anything, and I think that's why, again, like Nick, it took me a little bit of time to get into it, but after giving that time, I actually enjoy this album a lot. I picked out a few songs in particular. Nick's already mentioned The Underside of Power.
You shouldn't mention it again, then, Fran.
The Underside of Power, in case you didn't know.
Very insulting.
Hymn for an Average Man, I enjoyed a lot. And then this one that I can't pronounce. How are you going to tell me how to say it, Nick?
Oh, Mademoiselle Rio?
Yeah, something like that.
I think Nermal has better French than I do.
Nermal? The one after A Murmur, a Sign?
That one's Me Rieux.
Oh, jeez.
Thanks for that. So that one too. But yeah, in general, I mean, I think they're a really interesting band. I'm very interested to to go back and listen to the other album. I think they've had a couple of albums before. I did watch Needle Drop's review, and he sort of says the previous work is better. So
right,
but then I think everything he says
I always
wrong,
steer away from listening to other reviews once it's on our list. But I will go back to that now and see what Needle Drop has to say about it. Yeah, so.
Check it out.
No, what do you think?
Is describing it as something that is unfamiliar because of the sort of the mix up with the genres is, I think, a great point. I mean, I don't know if I could attach it to anything I heard previously, except it was hard. And what a voice! The voice was just so powerful, I thought, and resonant above everything. So I'm glad I asked a question about the production stuff, because I wouldn't have picked up on how difficult it probably is to mix together all those different genres in a way that makes it, album sound cohesive. But, you saying it's the case, then, I guess I'll have to believe you.
I mean, maybe cohesive is overstaying it, though. I mean, I see what you're saying, but maybe it's just that they jar in a way that's actually pleasing once you get past the initial sort of shock. But I don't think they ever get, and I don't think they would want to write an angry political album that was that cohesive, I mean, but still, right. I see what you're saying. It does work, basically. Fundamentally, it does work, I think, and it's really worth people checking out. Yeah, I mean, and Underside of Power, what a song. I mean, that is really, that is a kick-ass song, I think, if I've heard it, and, goes on great
and goes on.
As well.
Great.
The first 3 songs as well is just to kind of smashing your head against the wall to get you started to listen to that. It's kind of, it wakes you up, especially after coming after quite a slow album on the playlist, which was Planetarium, which we'll come to later. But it was kind of, you couldn't be more opposed, really, could you? And it was, Well,
let's talk about Planetarium next.
Actually, if you don't mind, I'd like to jump in and say that we should talk about Pallbearer next, because I think there's interesting things to talk about in relation to this one.
I'd like to talk about Planetarium next, actually, if that's possible.
You're hard work tonight. Jesus.
Let's do Planetarium, yeah. So I wanted to actually ask you guys if you had heard the news that there might be another planet in our solar system. That NASA has been, or I think maybe, I don't know if it's NASA. I think it's a scientist who's been pointing a telescope to a very dark patch of the sky and has detected that there might be a massive planet out on the outskirts of our solar system. So
fascinating. So Pallbearer then.
So they need to add another song to the album. Is that what you're saying?
I think we have to add. I think we should call him and say,
I'll get in touch.
Yeah.
Are we going to talk about
you actually give us some opinions on the music, perhaps, no more?
Is there a question in this? Yes. The question is...
yes, there's no question. Is there a question in this? Yes.
Can you talk about the album?
Yes. As you were listening to it, were you paying attention to the song titles as you were listening? And did you make any connection between the song title and the nature of the actual melody? Fran?
I think I tried to a little bit, but I think I didn't fully get that. But I think, I don't know if you guys know, but apparently this album started as a commissioned work for Nico Muhly, who is a composer. And the album was originally a live performance where each song had its own sort of backdrop. They had a giant sphere which looked like the planet the song was about. So what I've written in my notes is kind of, if I'd have seen that, I think I could see how you would really get the connection, because the music and the visuals would connect. And I think maybe that's what this album slightly lacked, is that this is, for me, more of a performance piece.
Meant to be really live some way, right?
That said, I did enjoy listening to it, and but then again, I found it hard to sort of pick out a song in particular, because I see it as a piece, like the whole thing as a piece. So I couldn't now tell you which songs meant what and how they linked up with the album, but with the titles. But without some really like obscure things, like saying, the Mars felt like a, I don't know. I can't do it. Can you? No.
Your experiences in Mars didn't resonate with the sound.
It's such a long time since I was at Mars. I've kind of forgotten. What about you? Could you connect them, Nemo?
Is anyone that's called tripping right now? I just want to know. Just want to check in on our drug intake lately. Go ahead, Nemo.
Maybe. No, I had no idea what the connections were between the titles and the music. So I think it is absolutely needs to be some sort of visual experience as well. But I think it really is a kind of visual experience. But it was in the background a lot when I was working and driving and just going about my daily business, and I remember being, in a mood to trip. If as I was listening to it, I thought it was kind of ethereal. I thought the pieces of it that were more atmospheric were less interesting to me than the pieces with actually the singing or the audio. So I thought that was kind of it was sort of an interesting album, but I can't say that I would go back to it unless it was wrapped up in some sort of other video of some kind.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was, I think, linked to both what both of you are saying is really fundamentally not, well, let me put it this way. I'm not particularly a classical music fan, and this was very close to a classical music piece through a lot of it anyway, I felt like. Structurally, it worked that way. I have no disrespect to that genre. I just not really my interest. And it made me feel, when I listen to something that's so far from my range of interest, it makes me feel like actually I want to hear something with hooks, something with simple verse, chorus, bridge, verse, chorus structure, And the more I listened to this, although I didn't find it annoying at all, but it just made me feel like, okay, well, I wonder what the next album will be on this list that has some actual structure that I can read in some way, because this just felt like it drifted past me. It was very beautiful. And you could argue a lot better produced than the Algiers.
I thought this
by
was
that
a
measure,
guaranteed answer to the produced question, because clearly,
but it was produced in exactly the way you'd expect an album like this to be produced, and that wasn't maybe quite as much of a push as the other one. But yeah, I'm not disputing it. It's a well-made album, and sounds very beautiful for most of it, really all of it. But not something like Nermal said that I would be jumping to come back to, really.
Might come back.
I just want to point out though, before we go further, that at the start of the episode, Nermal, you introduced this as an album by James McAlister, which I think the other three people would be very, very upset, since he's the drummer.
What's wrong with the drummer? Come on, now you're having to go drummers.
Stevens, Bryce Dessner from The National, and Nico Muhly, the composer, may feel like they had a little bit of relevance on the album, so just to give them credit
if you're listed first on Spotify, you are the artist. I mean, it's just, we live in a short attention span world. I don't have time for 4 names.
Yeah, well,
Nermal's part of the Twitter generation. He doesn't do that. Enough. One name is enough.
I mean, he's a good drummer,
right.
Yeah.
So
I mean, it was solid, but I don't think that I'm gonna be kind of coming back to it much, and I don't feel like it's it kind of wowed me, really. But maybe if it had been in a performance piece like Fran is suggesting, it might have been worth it.
I'd absolutely love to see the live show. If they do it again, I'll be there, because I think obviously it is a very interesting piece of music, but it just is, you're lacking that connection, I think, without the visuals. And actually said the lyrics as well were so obscure that you couldn't really see the connection.
Right.
So yeah, but I mean, I did enjoy listening to it, and I probably will listen to it again, but probably not on repeat or anything.
Yep.
Incidentally, do either of you know what the Kuiper belt is?
Is this going to be...
No, but I feel like you're going to tell us.
Yeah, exactly. You're going to tell us, aren't you?
Go, tell us.
Come on, then.
No, that was an honest question. I mean, I guess if you guys don't know what it is, I can't really
There's no help.
Contribute.
James McAlister will know.
He's the expert.
Yeah,
he's the expert, isn't he? Yeah. Kuiper belt. Yeah. Maybe that's a question for our Twitter followers.
Yeah, I'll put it out there on Twitter. Everybody, watch out for that tweet. It'll be exciting.
Yeah. People will be leaving in droves when they hear that question.
I'll mention James McAlister in the tweet. See what you can tell.
Oh, just him though. Just him.
Ask about the Kuiper belt. Yeah. And also, if you could tweet the discovery of the new planet, that would be helpful as well.
I'm pretty sure you have the login details.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have...
I'm surprised nobody's brought up Pallbearer. But I feel like this is a good time to talk about it. I mean, it seems kind of heartless to leave them out.
He may have told you the title there, listeners, by the way, if you were listening carefully.
Wow. You're on great form, Nermal. Congratulations.
Who wants? Can I start on Pallbearer?
Yeah, I actually want to go. I want to go last. I think.
I'd like to get it over and done with.
You go.
Go last.
You go, Fran.
I'm going to just read out my first bullet point, and then I might stop. No, I'll carry on a little bit further than that.
Okay.
I have very little to say about this album, other than I found it incredibly generic and very self-indulgent. And then basically I go on to say that it just...
You sound like you're reading a 12th grade book report or something.
That was just one of my tweets.
That was a tweet. Oh, that makes sense. Now.
Yeah, I've got to have 140 characters, mate. That's what I do with my notes. But yeah, there was just nothing new here for me. The only thing new about this album for me was that none of the songs were shorter than 5.5 minutes, and 2 of them were over 11.5, and I had to listen to that. And when I saw it was 7 songs, I thought, oh well, at least I'll get through these dirges quite quickly. But no, because some of them are. One of them's 13 minutes long, and yeah, it wasn't for me. I'll just. Okay.
Your anger is palpable. I almost feel like you must have listened to this album after you texted both of us and said, "When are we moving on to the next?" Is that right?
Yeah. Every time I heard the first song, then I wanted to text you and say, "Can we move on?"
Need something else.
Can I stop listening to music now, please?
Well, I think we should be able to compare. We should compare this to Algiers. I think
good
that's
idea.
Yeah.
Who would come up with that?
One of us.
God. I just want to reach down the fucking microphone and throttle you.
Hey,
anyway.
Careful with the words. We are not an explicit podcast, so
Thank you.
We would need to recalibrate our log.
Come on, tell us what you think.
Hard. Oh yeah, I thought this was hard and muscular and real badass.
I just need to spat water out all over Nick's computer. By the way, so you know.
Muscular. I love that. That's amazing.
Muscular. Yeah, I was on the road listening to this, and I just felt the need to cut people off as I drove. It was really exciting. However, I don't know if I could bear more than a couple listens, but after getting through it, I was reminded of how much I loved old metal, and spent a few days just returning to some Black Sabbath and Danzig I was listening to as a result of listening to this. So
it was a happy outcome then, in some extent.
It was a happy outcome for me. Yes, it was.
Yeah.
I think it's why they finish with a song called A Plea for Understanding. I think they're just asking us to forgive them for the previous 7 songs.
So,
no?
May I interject now?
Yeah, go for it, Nick.
So,
defend this album.
I will say that I don't think since we started doing this podcast, I've been more disappointed with an album from what my expectations were. I heard about it through the Deep Cuts vlog, and as a doom metal album, or at least a doom metal band, and I don't know if they for this specific album, a doom metal band. And I want to pick up on one word that Fran used earlier, which is he didn't want to listen to any more of this dirge. I actually really wish it was a dirge. I would have much, much preferred it to be a lot heavier than this. It wasn't that heavy. Algiers, this is why I wanted to talk about Algiers in relation to this. Algiers is a much darker, heavier, more aggressive album than Pallbearer, even though Pallbearer does nothing but attempt to sell how heavy and tough, muscular, I think is a great word to use now,
sure.
A version of itself. Actually, ultimately, it is very generic, as Fran said. It's very tired, it's very cliched, it's very I just thought it was not that dark, and I'm sure and maybe fans of the band think it's tough. I mean, I'd encourage them to. There's a lot of bands I can think of who are a lot darker than this, I'll put it that way, and I would if that's what you're looking for, I don't think Pallbearer is justifiably delivering what they say they're delivering. And that's really the issue for me. It's not a question of, I mean, it's just that they're selling something that's not, not kind of what they're really delivering. They're sort of saying they're tough. They're kind of purporting to be tough and hard and heavy, and they're really not. The songs weren't slow enough to be doomy for me, and they weren't dirgy, as I said. And actually, ultimately, a lot of them, in particular, I thought the second one, which is called Thorns, sounded like, and this is a little bit of an insult to the band, to the other band, but sounded a bit like Alice in Chains, who I think have done some great stuff in years past, and obviously a long time ago now. But but it's a different genre. It's not doom, certainly not. But this sounded like a kind of rather tired rip-off of that. So I really wanted to find something heavy, and I will say though that this doesn't mean that I'm going to give up on my quest to try and find a really, really scarily dark, heavy album, because this is not it. So
want to compare it to Planetarium, actually, in the sense that I think this, for strange, I think this album, Pallbearer's album, is written for probably fans, and written in such a way that it would be a moving experience live when you had this, crowd of people sort of you're just going on with these 11-minute songs, and everybody's sort of like zoned out and listening. And it feels like it is an album meant to add songs to a live set almost, right? Rather than an album in its own right, listen to in any venue. It seems really meant for this audience.
Yeah, I think about it for long enough to even draw those conclusions.
I think live would probably improve this in terms of the weight of that distortion and volume would hit you. But put it this way, if you were to hear Algiers live or this live, you'd still have a massive disparity in which was the heavier, darker, and louder thing, louder conceptually thing, And I think Algiers would still, to be honest, kick its ass. It would just be so much more dark and intense, So, it just, very, very unfortunate. And Deep Cuts, although, which is a channel I really like, I will say, is worth checking out. But that wasn't a good call. Unless, of course, they changed genre a lot in this new album versus the last couple, which is what I think he was specifically referring to. So, yeah.
So of these four guys, what's your favorite? Nick?
Algiers. Algiers was really refreshing and a bit of hard work, which I like with albums sometimes, which got me somewhere, which is worthwhile.
Marika Hackman for me, because I love the jangliness. But Algiers, I was a big fan of Algiers as well. Those two were, very enjoyable albums. So, but Marika Hackman probably edged it for me.
No?
Wow. Well, as much as I'd like to disagree, I think Marika Hackman as well. Like for me, just I really enjoyed it, and I'm really I think one of the things I'm really looking forward to the next album by Marika Hackman. It's like I'll be on it, and like white on rice. But I don't typically eat white. Well, I do. Last night I had a great white rice.
You've not been getting enough sleep.
Yeah, you're okay. I'm really starting to become concerned now. Are you okay or what?
Right,
all right, we've got two more to go. We've got
move on to Claw?
Let's move on to Chlor. So I suggested this because of what I saw in terms of on the Enemy's 2010 Greatest Albums You've Never Heard list. And as I listened to it, I was convinced I should be able to finish this without laughing. I was sort of convinced maybe it's not an album I would have wanted to hear. But
you just stole my first bullet point. That's exactly my joke. You just stole my joke.
Well, there you go. I don't know why it's so great. I did not enjoy it. I need someone to help me understand this is enjoyable. But
I'm going to put it out there, Nimble, and think it's you, because the two classic albums you've chosen so far have been XTC and this, and they've both caused me as much pain.
Yeah. But I thought this album was all right. I want to defend it a little bit.
You can defend it in a minute.
Okay,
I'll
let you go.
Well, it grew on me the most of the 5 albums on this playlist, actually, and that's because when I first heard it, I thought it was the worst album I'd ever heard. And by the end, I kind of thought it was just forgettable, but not horrible.
Wow. That's very extreme.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, not the worst album I've ever heard.
Exactly, you're throwing that around too easily.
One of the most disappointing albums. Because it is the Enemy's gone downhill, hasn't it? Let's be honest. But to say that it's the best album you've never heard, and as Neil said, I wish I still hadn't heard it. But Nick's gonna.
I didn't hate this album. I thought this album was full of the kind of energy that a lot of those bands out of the 2000s had. Particularly the best example of which was the Test Icicles. Dev Hines' band, who's now Blood Orange, and that album, Test Icicles, which is called, I forget now. I'll have to put that on. We'll have to put that up on the post later. But that album, there's only the one album, is really fantastic, and like this though has a sort of bubbly energy to it, which I found quite addictive, honestly. Not jangly though, bubbly. There's a big difference.
Mate, I'm in genuine shock.
I didn't love it, but I thought there was some particular points like what's the one, Hearts on Fire, that I thought was kind of like a very interesting kind of earworm kind of song, kind of addictive little rhythm that kind of worked well. So, but again, I didn't love it, but I mean, certainly in no way was it the worst I've ever heard. Come on.
All right, I was getting a bit carried away there. It's the worst album I heard that month. Is that a bit more?
Okay.
A bit tamer.
Yeah, I mean, it's worse than the Pallbearer then. Come on.
All right, it's the second worst album.
Yeah, it's exactly.
the second worst album I heard.
Out of 6 is the second worst.
No, what I said, though, if you remember what I said, is that I started off thinking that, and then it grew on me a little bit.
Okay.
So I started off really hating it. I started off thinking it was kind of because the XTC that we did on a previous playlist never grew on me at all, whereas this did grow on me a tiny bit, a little tiny bit.
Not where you would want it to grow.
No.
This I saved one of these songs because I really kind of thought it was catchy. I mean, I think it was stuck in a tight spot. And then it came up again as I was listening to some other stuff, and I said, I'm going to unsave this. I did not like that. I did not like that. But I tried, I tried. It sort of ungrew on me,
That's very kind of you to try anyway. Well done.
It sounds all right when it's in the middle of this album, but when you're playing it against other music, you realise quite how terrible it is.
Wow.
I don't know what the opposite is, but it was definitely an ungrowing experience. I kind of was into it and then less and less so.
Okay.
Fair enough.
Wow.
Okay, I think we've been up
we move
that
on?
album enough. That's pretty harsh. Okay, so Leonard Cohen, please tell us
yes,
all
all right,
about
so,
Leonard Cohen.
I'm delighted that I was able to kind of put together this list. It allowed me to kind of go back and listen to old Leonard Cohen. I've been listening to a lot of his later stuff recently. So the playlist is in chronological order from the beginning of his career to the most recent stuff. And I was particularly interested in 3 parts of it, and I would love to hear you guys comment on these elements, which was like the evolution of his voice, and especially how it sort of got more slower, deeper, gravelly, like a almost voice from below kind of voice by the end of it.
Were you doing the voice then?
Yeah, we thought you were actually replicating it then.
I'm channeling. I thought and then the darkening of those lyrics I thought was kind of interesting. The lyrics got even more and more dark, and amazing. You can kind of think of his stuff getting darker than it was in the beginning. So I'm not really sure when I first heard his music, but it has hit and come up. Leonard Cohen's work has come up at really interesting times and been vibrant in my life in a few moments, and it's kind of really stuck with me. The first one was when I was listening to him for the first time in Paris in '97. I was studying abroad, pretending to be an intellectual in the dark, listening, smoking, eating some cheese and a baguette when I really probably should have been reading. But that's not what intellectuals do, right? They pretend. And so I was listening to the lyrics, but I was really moved by them, and I thought it was really hitting my 18-year-old self really right there, square in the heart. And then just a few years later, I listened to him off and on, but just a few years later, I heard Nick Cave being interviewed by Mark Maron. And Nick Cave saying in that interview how he wished he could write as narratively infused and cohesive lyrics and songs as Leonard Cohen does in Songs of Love and Hate. And I thought that was really telling, because I thought, Nick Cave is, I think, a great kind of narrative songwriter, and that he looked to Leonard Cohen as a kind of influence and a beacon in some ways of that kind of writing that he's done. I've been listening to Leonard Cohen ever since then, with a little eye towards Nick Cave and that comparison. So that was interesting.
That's a great comparison. We should talk more about that, absolutely. But so go ahead though, yeah.
then and then it's just a few years after that, in 2013, my wife and I had tickets to see him live, and I was hospitalized for a rejection of my liver of my transplant. So I had to go back in the hospital. I told my wife Bashak to go, regardless to the concert, because I wish I was there, and she turned on the phone and opened the mic and had Suzanne, which was one of my favorites, piped in from the concert into my hospital room. Wow. And just sat there alone in the room listening to Cohen, miles away through my wife's phone, which was kind of moving experience. And then the last
intense experiences of listening to these albums, like you did with The Neutral as well. Yeah.
Well, music is an intense experience for me, Nick. I'm sure you can relate to that.
Yeah, I can take it or leave it, honestly. Yeah,
but you like the Floor album, so
the last thing I just wanted to mention is that so Leonard Cohen died last year in November, and it was the day before Trump beat Clinton in the American election. And Bashak and I listened to Leonard Cohen a couple nights after that, either mourning him or the country, and I'm not really sure what we were doing, but we were just sobbing all sort of uncontrollably at that moment, and sad. But we were listening to his song "You Want It Darker," and it feels like I was almost feeling like, hey, as a country, we really want things to be as divisive and dark as possible, and our less than ideal selves will bring us there before we get any better. So it was a kind of tough, momentous moment, but it was also kind of healing, because we could still turn to Leonard Cohen. So that's my experience of him. So I would love to hear what you guys thought of this stuff.
Yeah, maybe I'll go first, I guess. Yeah, I mean, so I'm not that familiar with his work. Obviously, I know of him. I knew you were, so this is great that you've given us sort of these powerful moments about how he's affected you. I think the Nick Cave association is really interesting to raise because of the narrative form of the songs. But also because of some of the things to do with the production. So, and also the obviously very high caliber writing. I suppose for me, one of the amazing things was just how good a poet he really is. I feel like actually, since you talk about the voice, the distinctions in the voice, I don't notice there's as much because I'm not as familiar with everything he's done as you are, evidently. So in that sense, I don't think of him as a singer really. I think of him as a poet. Maybe like a Dylan and maybe like a Nick Cave to some extent. I thought lots of the album was really so. For example, Villanelle for Our Time, was that one? Was that? Yeah. So I loved that track. That was really great. There was nothing I disliked on it at all. The only little caveat I'd say is I feel like sometimes the production forms that he took in the earlier stuff in particular. They sort of have aged. They've sort of sound a bit more dated than maybe the lyrics need them to be, as it were. Yeah. They don't quite. They sort of sound.
They sound 60s, right?
They sound very 60s or 70s sometimes, and that's fine. I'm nothing against that, but I just feel like actually, if you were to put some of these songs or these lyrics to modern production techniques, you'd actually get something that still sounded very fresh, and didn't actually sound of the 70s, say, So, and I was interesting. Fran and I went to see Nick Cave last week, actually, and which was amazing. And I was thinking about on the way home afterwards that in a way Nick Cave is an artist who actually I don't actually. This sounds really radical to say, but I don't actually love Nick Cave's music to some extent. But I love the persona, I love the performance and the ideas, but I certainly love the lyrics. I think he's an incredible writer. So in a way, the Leonard Cohen connection there is that both of them actually, write at this level, produce these narratives at this level that are just so powerful and affecting. But actually, the music behind that, it's enough to sell the music behind that, even if sometimes that music isn't necessarily my absolute first choice, you know. So anyway, I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of how I would characterize it. Yeah. So
Before I move on to my thoughts, I did have a question for you, Nick, because I remember when we listened to, before we started recording the podcast, we listened to Cohen's album from last year, and you said that when you came away from, because you knew Cohen was such a big thing, it just felt a little bit too Leonard Cohen, and you kind of couldn't get past that.
Yeah, that's true.
And I wondered whether spending some time with this playlist, and because I've known him very well as well, so I'm just quite interested in spending some time with this playlist and hearing a bit of his evolution. Did that change, or is it still something you feel is like? I did still feel like, you know, again, like a Dylan, he has a very, very distinctive voice. You could always spot it was him. Even though there was, as Noel was saying, when you knew him very well, changes in the tone of that voice, but you would never be mistaken to think it was somebody else, and that's not a bad thing. But I think maybe it was hard to get past that. But I think this playlist was very successful and helpful, so thank you for it, Noel, because getting through from the start to the end of this sort of pushed me to absorb, sort of push through that barrier almost, that barrier of like, this is just Leonard Cohen talking all the time.
Sure,
you know? Yeah.
Well, for me, I'm going to go to the playlist to start with, Nirmal, in that I know obviously this is an obvious thing to say in some ways because it was in chronological order, but it also felt with the song choices that you did choose, and there was a real sense of him aging through this playlist. There was a real sense of, and I love the fact that you started it with Dance Me to the End of Love, and then you ended it with a live version of Dance Me to the End of the Love from 30 years later, because it really felt like, and especially finishing with the songs from the album You Want It Darker from last year, which are Leaving the Table, which is obviously he knew he was dying at this point, and it's for me, I found the playlist quite an emotional sort of ride, really. So I was really, really impressed with that. I mean, I was already a pretty big Cohen fan. My mum was a big fan when I was a kid, so I heard him a lot. And I loved last year's album, but what really impressed me and what I kind of hadn't been aware of was how consistent he was throughout, because I kind of didn't know a lot of the mid-career stuff. So a few songs that I picked up that I didn't really know before were My Secret Life, Who by Fire, I'm Your Man. I knew a few from that era. Like I'd heard a few of them before, but I hadn't spent. Yeah, Everybody Knows obviously was one that I knew really well from that era because that was a massive song at the time. But I was really impressed to see that actually he never really dropped like some other artists of his era or his caliber have. You know, you kind of wish they'd stop putting albums out. But I mean, for me, actually, You Want It Darker was possibly one of his best albums. So that he bowed out with that is
kind of amazing, right?
Yeah, it's incredible.
You know, to Nick's point about him being a poet too, you know, he I would talk about how he really didn't like his voice at all, and he preferred to write and preferred to publish poetry, and he did. But I think the putting it in the audio format eventually and working with other musicians ended up having such a wider audience for his poetry, and he always was very self-conscious about his voice and started to bring in, especially when he started bringing in some background vocalists to boost it, essentially. And I know a lot of Cohen fans love him and love him live, especially because of the amazing women he has behind him singing along and boosting up the lyrical stuff. And he plays that too. I'm also reminded of something that I've heard in a couple of live recordings where he will talk to the audience saying he was looking at himself in the mirror and just says, "Cheer up, man. What's got you so down?" You know, it's sort of like, you know, but he even says it in such a way that is incredibly somber, right? So it's kind of funny. I miss him a lot, and wish I could still hear his new stuff come out, but I'm glad. I love the opportunity to have created this playlist because I think I'll be going back to it quite a bit.
Great. Yeah. Well, it's all saved up. So we're under Picky Bastards episode 5, isn't it? Yep. So right. Yeah. So we have everyone can hear it, and you can hear it again. Great.
All right. Well, let's talk about next time.
Okay, I just wanted to put in an honourable mention, though, actually, for an album that I heard during the course of the month. I thought maybe we could all mention one if we have one. Just that something that wasn't on this list, but I thought was worth recommending to people. And it's not a very radical choice, I think, for me. But the new Everything Everything album, A Fever Dream, came out in the last month, and I kind of wish it had been on this playlist, maybe in the place of, say, I don't know, Pallbearer. Because it would have been a slight improvement on level of quality. It's a really great album. It's a ton of energy and a very kind of danceable album, which is not something I would usually be that fussed about. But really incredibly well produced. It's so well produced. I actually bought it on vinyl, and because some of the spaces they've used to record these sort of danceable elements, but they've recorded them all very live, just sounds. Just jumps right out at you and really sort of grabs you. So yeah, it's a fantastic album, lots of energy, and anyone who hasn't heard it should check it out.
Cool.
Well,
do you have any of those as well?
If I'm going to do an honourable mention, I don't think it'll surprise anyone who listened to episode 4 when I introduced you guys to the National that my honourable mention from the last month would be Sleep Well Beast by the National.
You took mine.
I'm sorry, but I'm keeping it. You let me go first, so you know. But I think it's an interesting. Not just if the National had released any album, I would probably be choosing that right now. But the fact that they have really evolved with this album and they're doing something interesting, they're while keeping their sound, and lyrically, he's, if it's possible, taken a sort of step up in that he tells a real story through this album. It's the first kind of concept album. It's very emotional album, but it's got a couple of tracks that they haven't done a track as heavy of since their early stuff. There's a track called Turtleneck, which didn't start out as my favourite, but it's kind of an anti-Trump rant, which is nice to see them add to their repertoire. But yeah, there's just some lyrics on the album that will just I find kind of very heartbreaking and quite beautiful, and it's they've done it again. So yeah, that's mine.
Nice.
Memo, do you have one or not?
Yeah, well, this was actually relatively recent. I got really into Tricky's album man, I don't know how to pronounce this. Ununiform, I think it's pronounced Ununiform. It's Tricky's. It's kind of confusing to look at. Anyway, it's man, I don't know, classic Tricky. It's dark, very melodic, nice. Rock,
is he
hip-hop.
As cool as ever? Is he like
rock hip hop,
slick and cool as ever? Because he's usually just so like exuding that incredible coolness.
He is incredibly cool, and I think he's also underfed. He seems incredibly skinny, and I just hope that he
he's taking a few too many substances in rather than the underfed thing.
Oh, I don't think he's into that. It's not.
No, it's not that kind of music, really, is it?
It's not really.
I saw him in Boston, actually, and I just remember the first time I saw it, this is more than a decade ago, he spent about half an hour facing the drummer with a massive bong in his hand, just like not even looking at the audience. It's like half the set went without me seeing his face. It was amazing. So, anyway. I'll have to check that out. I haven't heard the album, so that'd be good.
I like it. I like Tricky a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's talk about next time.
Yeah, let's do it. So next time I'll be... I recommended that we listen to the Queens of Stone Age album, Villain, and Liar's new album, TFCF. Nick?
Actually, no, Fran first.
I'll go because I've gone with Daughter's album, Music from Before the Storm, which is actually a soundtrack to a computer game, apparently.
Oh, that's going to be fantastic.
Yeah.
Thanks for that.
It's good to know.
No judgment yet. Come on.
I've also gone for Dark Days and Canapes by Ghost Poet.
And I will be kind of leading things and introducing... well, first of all, I'll be talking about the classic album, which is the My Bloody Valentine's Loveless. And then I'll be introducing one of my favourite bands, Quasi, and their album featuring Birds, which I think is from 99, I think, but I have to check on that. So,
are you sure it's not Quasi?
It might be Quasi. It might be Quasi. I'm going to go with Quasi, but
Quasi sounds.
You can go with whatever you prefer.
Better.
Fair enough. Then
go with Quasi.
The two English people say is Quasi, so deal with it.
Yeah. Well, we won the war.
I don't know if we can get into that right now.
Good place to end, I reckon. Good place to end.
All right. So,
friends.
Thanks very much then, and we will see you next time.
Absolutely. Adios.